But there's a new ball game. We have the information on the Statue of Liberty. When it first came out, it was a student that gave it to me, and I'm going to run for these next few minutes. There's a student that gave me the information because a black chemist, Jack Felder, had compiled an information sheet with the data and information where you could find it. And when we put our information out there, we need to put at the end of it the documentation source where we can discover this information. And so when he put the documentary data, et cetera, I followed it up, being a consummate scholar. I grabbed some of the Sons of Africa. We jumped in a couple of cars, went down to the New York City Museum, 106th Street and 5th Avenue, looking for this black Statue of Liberty. The first model was of an image of a black woman holding the broken chains of enslavement with the broken chains of enslavement at her feet. Nobody there knew anything about it. All the people there were black, 5 or 6 blacks, and ain't nobody knew nothing. I refused to leave. Black folks got cognitive dissonance. They didn't want to understand, didn't want to do nothing. But when I refused to leave, then they started thinking. And then they said, well, there was a Haitian guard who was there. So they said, go get him. Maybe he knows something. He was there in '86 when they had the celebration. So they go get the Haitian guard. He said, of course, the model for Statue of Liberty is downstairs. I said, can we see it? No, the director has a key locked up. Ain't nobody can see it. So I said, well, is there any other information about the Statue of Liberty? He went off, came back with a book by Marvin Trachtenberg called The Statue of Liberty. And in it, he opened it up and showed the various models of the Statue of Liberty with the chains at the feet. Then the brother Felder said, you can go down to the French Cultural Center. That's further down on 5th Avenue, 83rd Street or 82nd Street and 5th Avenue. I went there, knocked on the door, just got in there just in time. I had called them before and asked them, did they have any information on the Statue of Liberty? And they gave me a large magazine called Liberty, the anniversary edition of the magazine France, and that dealt with the founding of the Statue of Liberty. It had a picture of Edouard René Lefleur de la Boulay, the Frenchman who came up with the idea of the Statue of Liberty. He was a political scientist. He was a French leader. He was a French parliamentarian. He wrote a 3-volume history of the United States, but more important than that, Edouard René Lefleur de la Boulay, who came up with the idea of the Statue of Liberty in 1865, was head of the French Anti-Slave Society. In 1865, people were not interested in immigration into the United States. In fact, the United States in the 1850s, 1860s had established a know-nothing party. They did not want immigrants. They were against immigrants, and the immigrants that they were against were Papists, German and Irish Catholics. There was no prospect of bringing in immigrants from Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe. These were the unwashed masses. 1865 was our period. 1865 is when 500,000 black people, 250,000 of them official Union Army Navy troops, participated in the Civil War, freeing 4 million of their compatriots, and then saving this nation. The question of black folks getting into their history has nothing to, and fighting for their liberty and struggling for what is right, is not the question of disuniting America. It has been our struggle that has kept America united. It has been our struggle that has raised anew the liberties that this nation professes. It has been our struggle that has created the 14th Amendment that became the amendment that the women could use and others could use when they talked about the expansion of liberty in America. America was founded by rich white men with property and power. It was founded on an affirmative action program for rich white men with property and power. From the very beginning of the founding of these colonies, rich white men with property and power were given affirmative action and set-asides, whole land set aside for them to develop, and whole people set aside to work it for free, including white folks who came as virtual slaves under indentured servitude. There was a set-aside and affirmative action for rich white folks with property and power in the beginning of this nation, and that tradition under the British and under the Dutch was maintained. And when independence was established, and the Constitution put in place in 1787 is a document of affirmative action for rich white folks with property and power. Because we do not have the critical analysis we need, and that's why we need study groups, serious study groups for the adults and for the teachers, we continue to go around talking about there was a 3/5 clause put in the Constitution, and we had 3/5 rights of white folks. You had no rights in the American constitutional frame of reference. Women had no significant rights. The Constitution did not speak to them, and poor men did not have any significant rights in the Constitution. The Constitution speaks to rich white men with property and power. It's there for you to read with your eyes open and to put an analysis to it. 3/5 clause in affirmative action and a set-aside for the slave owners. A slave owner who had 200 of our peoples enslaved had 3/5 more voting power for them than a normal rich white man. That's democracy. That's oligarchy. But we still posture a position of democracy as part of the founding process. Democracy came as we struggled to widen the American process to include the most deprived and dispossessed of the people in the system. Our struggle has been the heroic struggle. It's an enormous struggle. If you can only tap into it, if you only knew it, the struggle of our people collectively for freedom, justice, we have been the liberating people force in this nation. from day one when we arrived. And that Constitution, if you read it again, there's two places that mention black folks, is this 3/5 clause, and then they got this question of 1808. 1808 is a set-aside for rich white men with property and power, the Jeffersons and the Washingtons and the Monroes. A set-aside. Instead of ending slavery in 1787, which they could have done, if they were lovers of freedom, justice, and equality. Instead of ending the slave trade in 1787, which they could have done, if their Declaration of Independence meant anything to them. We hold all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If they really believed that, they could have instituted a constitution that destroyed these things as the French did. But they did not believe it because the nation was founded by rich white men with property and power. They put the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and everything together. So they set aside 20 years for them to continue the slave trade up until 1808. Set-asides for rich white men with property and power become what has been the basis of this nation. And then they beat up on us about affirmative action and set-asides for what we've contributed to America. So you've got to have an analysis. That's what we're saying. And just let me give you this one frame of reference to show how this enormity of material can be processed in a way to make it work for you. And then we'll have the question and answer period. I come up with